think for a moment, when you pick up your prescription, maybe buy something over the counter at the pharmacy. We generally assume, right, that what we're getting is safe, that it's actually going to work.
Yeah, you trust the system.
Exactly. But globally, that's not always a given. The World Health Organization, the WHO, estimates that a pretty staggering 30% of national regulatory authorities.
The NRAs, yeah.
Right, the bodies meant to oversee medical products, they actually lack the capacity to do that job effectively.
30%. That's huge. And it's a critical global issue, really. When those systems aren't strong, well, you get this environment where ineffective or even harmful medications can circulate.
Which is terrifying.
It is. And it doesn't just put individuals at risk. It, erodes public trust in the whole healthcare system.
Okay, so that's a pretty significant vulnerability we're talking about. But thankfully, there is a big effort to tackle this. The WHO Global Benchmarking Tool, the GBT, we've been digging into this paper from BMJ Global Health, and it really frames this tool as, well, a potential game changer.
It really does. It's aiming to be the first globally accepted tool to sort of objectively assess and strengthen that regulatory capacity for medicines, vaccines.
So our goal today really is to unpack what this GBT is all about, how it works, and why it actually matters to all of us listening without getting bogged down in jargon.
Yeah, consider it a shortcut to understanding a really crucial piece of global health security.
And this BMJ Global Health paper, it gives a great overview, doesn't it? The goals, the mechanics, the impact.
Exactly. And it also looks at where things can still be improved, which is always a good sign. It means the system's evolving.
Definitely. Okay, so let's dive right into the core problem. When a country's regulatory system is weak, what does that actually look like on the ground? What are the consequences?
Well, the paper highlights a few key challenges. A big one is the lack of a solid legal framework, or sometimes it's fragmented.
Meaning the NRA, the regulatory authority, just doesn't have the clear power it needs.
Precisely. They might lack the legal mandate or the authority to actually carry out all the functions they should be doing. It's like trying to enforce rules without, the rule book being clear or agreed upon.
Right, like trying to build a house on shaky foundations.
Exactly. And then, compounding that, there's often chronic underfunding.
Oh, resources.
Always resources.
Yeah.
So you see shortages of qualified staff, inadequate facilities, lack of equipment. Basically, not having what they need to manage the complexity of regulating medicines.
And the direct result.
The most direct result, as the paper really stresses, is just the inability to guarantee the safety, the effectiveness, and the overall quality of the medicine circulating in that country.
Which has a real knock-on effect, doesn't it? It's not just, does this pill work?
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
It opens the door to actual harm. The WHO figures suggest about a third of the world's population lacks reliable access to quality-assured medicines.
A third? That's huge.
It is. And the paper really digs into the dangers of these poor quality medicines. They can be substandard, meaning, not enough active ingredient, maybe contaminated.
Okay.
Or they can be falsified, deliberately faked, sometimes with no active ingredient at all. Imagine the impact on trust when people get meds that don't work, or worse, make them sicker.
Yeah, that's a frightening thought. You're seeking help, and what you get is useless or even dangerous.
Exactly. And the consequences are severe. You get increased patient risk, treatment failures, you waste precious healthcare resources, and tragically preventable deaths.
The paper mentioned a specific statistic.
Yes, a truly sobering one. In 2013, it's estimated that nearly 4%, 3.75% of deaths in kids under 5 in sub-Saharan Africa were linked to poor quality antimalarials.
Wow, it really underscores the human cost here. This isn't just bureaucracy.
Not at all, it's life and death.
So, okay, that sets the stage. It's clear why something needed to be done. How does the global benchmarking tool, the GBT, fit into this? Where did it come from?
Well, the GBT was developed by the WHO, and it came directly out of a World Health Assembly resolution back in 2014.
Okay.
There was this global agreement, really, that countries needed more support to strengthen their regulatory systems. The resolution specifically called for using WHO tools to assess these systems, figure out how they're performing, and help countries develop plans to improve.
So a direct response to this gap everyone recognized.
Yes, exactly. And its development wasn't just top-down. It was iterative, collaborative. WHO looked at existing tools, talked extensively with member states, other global health stakeholders, trying to understand the real needs and challenges.
Makes sense. Build it with the people who'll use it.
Right. And that whole process led to GBT Revision 6, which was finalized in 2018. And as the paper notes, that's now become the sort of global standard for assessing regulatory capacity for medicines and vaccines.
And it's not stopping there.
No, they're looking ahead. There are plans for GVT Plus, which would bring in other important things like blood products and medical devices.
Interesting. Okay, so it sounds comprehensive. Let's get into the nuts and bolts. How does this benchmarking actually work? What's the process like for a country?
It unfolds in a few stages, typically.
Uh-huh.
It starts with a kind of pre-assessment phase, getting familiar with the tool, the requirements.
Getting ready.
Yeah. Then there's a self-assessment, where the country's own NRA evaluates itself against the GBT framework.
Okay, an internal look first.
Right. And then comes the most formal part,
Yeah.
the external benchmarking. This is led by WHO, involves independent experts, and it's pretty thorough. It can take 2 to 5 years to complete fully.
2 to 5 years, that's a serious commitment.
It is. It shows the depth they go into.
So what are these experts looking at during that time?
They use detailed fact sheets from WHO and a digital version of the tool, and are evaluating against 268 indicators and sub-indicators.
268, wow.
Yeah, it's granular. These are grouped into 9 main categories. There's the overall national regulatory system itself, and then 8 core regulatory functions.
Like what kind of functions?
Things like how medicines get registered and authorized for sale, pharmacovigilance, which is crucial, monitoring drug safety after they're on the market.
Right, watching for side effects and problems.
Exactly. Then market surveillance, licensing facilities, inspections, lab testing capabilities, how clinical trials are overseen, and for vaccines, the process for lot release. The paper mentions Table 1 breaks these down.
So it really is a top-to-bottom review of everything a good regulatory agency should be doing.
Pretty much. And the whole point is to pinpoint both the strengths and the weaknesses in all these areas.
Okay.
And importantly, it assigns a maturity level. It uses a scale from 1 to 4.
Level 1 to 4, what do those mean?
So level 1 basically means there's no formal system, maybe just reacting after a big problem happens.
Reactive.
Yeah. Level 2 is still quite reactive, but maybe a bit more organized. Level 3 is where you want to be a stable, well-functioning system, proactive surveillance.
Okay, proactive, looking for issues before they blow up.
Right. And level 4 is even beyond that. It's
Yeah.
about continuous improvement, constantly analyzing processes, optimizing, even when things are generally working well.
Always getting better.
That's the goal. And the paper mentions over 75 countries have already done either the self-assessment or the full formal benchmark. So there's real uptake.
Okay, so a country goes through this, maybe takes a few years, gets its maturity level scores. What happens next? What do they do with that information?
That's where the Institutional Development Plan, or IDP, comes in. This is absolutely vital.
The IDP.
Yeah. It's basically the action plan. It's tailored specifically based on those strengths and weaknesses found during the benchmarking.
And who creates this plan?
Crucially, it's led by the country itself. They formulate it, they implement it, they monitor it. Of course, they get support from partners, USAID, Gates Foundation, the Global Fund, others mentioned.
So it's country-owned, but with international support.
Exactly. It's not just about WHO coming in and saying, here's what's wrong. It's about collaborating on, here's how we fix it. The IDP sets realistic standards, achievable steps, and outlines the specific things needed to move up the maturity levels.
So practical steps for improvement.
Very practical. And the paper makes a good point. A country might not be at the same level for every single function, and they don't necessarily need to fix everything at once.
Ah, so they can prioritize.
Yes. They can prioritize based on their specific situation, their main health problems, their local market, how much they rely on other countries' regulatory decisions.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. Focus resources where they're needed most first.
Right. The interventions are incremental, step by step, all contributing to raising the overall maturity. So the GVT through the IDP really offers this customized pathway for improvement.
It sounds like a very practical and context-aware system. Now, the paper talks a lot about the benefits, this idea of a common language and the power of measurement. Can you unpack some of those key positive impacts?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the biggest wins is just strengthening the regulatory systems themselves. Well, by using this standard system, the maturity levels, the defined functions, it gives everyone a systematic framework. It defines what good looks like.
Instead of just guesswork or fragmented effort.
Exactly. It moves away from maybe just looking at one disease area to looking at the whole system needed for effective regulation. And the process itself pushes for good regulatory practices like more transparency,
Transparency how?
like encouraging NRAs to have open consultations,
Yeah.
talk to stakeholders, publish their policies and guidelines so everyone knows the rules.
So better governance, too.
Definitely. And because the IDP has these concrete steps, it empowers the regulators and policymakers. They have a clear plan.
A roadmap.
A roadmap, exactly. And having that plan helps protect progress from, say, political changes or leadership shifts. It builds consistency.
And you mentioned the maturity levels. How do they help?
They're actually a great communication tool. Levels 1 to 4, that's pretty easy for policymakers to grasp, right? It helps regulators make the case for needing more support or funding.
I see. A clear score helps get buy-in.
Yeah. We're at level 2. We need resources to get to level 3. It's a clear message.
Okay. And what about coordination? The paper mentions this coalition of interested parties, the CIP.
Right, the CIP. So because everyone's using the same GBP framework, the same language, it makes it much easier for countries and all the donors and partners to communicate and coordinate.
Everyone's on the same page.
Pretty much.
Hmm.
The WHO convenes this CIP, bringing together governments, donors, implementing groups. They all understand the NRA's capabilities, the standards, how progress is tracked.
Which must make things more efficient.
Hugely. It reduces duplication. You don't have 5 different donors trying to fix the same thing in slightly different ways. And it gives donors more confidence, right? They can see measurable progress based on a recognized standard.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Streamlining international support. Now, another big benefit area mentioned is regulatory reliance and harmonization. Can you explain those terms a bit?
Sure. Regulatory reliance is a really key concept. It basically means one NRA can leverage or use the work done by another trusted regulatory authority.
Like using their assessment.
Exactly. Say, using their scientific assessments of a new drug or their inspection reports of a manufacturing site. Especially helpful for smaller NRAs with limited resources.
So they don't have to reinvent the wheel every single time.
Precisely. Instead of every country reviewing every single drug application from scratch, they can rely on the work of authorities recognized under the GBT framework. This can massively speed up access to needed medicines.
And free up their own staff.
Right, to focus on things specific to their country, like post-marketing surveillance, watching how a drug performs in their population once it's approved.
Okay, that's reliance. What about harmonization?
Harmonization is more about aligning the actual rules, the requirements, across different countries. So aligning technical standards, guidelines, legal stuff.
Making the requirements more similar between countries.
Yeah. And the GBT helps here too, by providing those common standards and building the trust needed for countries to feel comfortable aligning their systems.
Are there examples of this working?
Oh yes, the paper points to several regional initiatives, like in the East African community, ASEAN, CARICOM, the Caribbean.
Right.
In these regions, you see NRAs collaborating. Often, the less developed ones learn from and get support from the stronger ones in the region. It lifts the whole region's capacity.
Like a rising tide lifts all boats for regulation?
Kind of, yeah. It's a cooperative approach. And all this, the reliance, the harmonization, leads directly to another huge benefit.
Which is?
Timely access to quality-assured medicines. That's the bottom line for patients.
How does it speed things up?
Well, if you don't have to do a full review because you can rely on another trusted agency's work, or if the requirements are harmonized across a region, medicines just get through the approval process faster.
Makes sense. Less duplication, less regulatory hurdles.
Exactly. The paper gives a great example. CARICOM's Caribbean Regulatory System, the CRS.
What did they achieve?
By relying on assessments from PAHO-designated NRAs and others, they cut the registration time for generic essential medicines from years down to just months.
Years to months. That's incredible.
It really is. Think what that means for patients needing those drugs. And again, it frees up the national authorities' resources for other critical jobs, like pharmacovigilance.
Any other examples?
The Zazibona initiative in Southern Africa is mentioned too, also streamlining registration and inspections through collaboration.
So it's not just about having strong rules, but making the process efficient so safe medicines get to people without unnecessary delays.
That's a key part of it, yes.
Okay. And finally, the paper touches on an economic angle, how the GBT can boost pharmaceutical trade. How does that connection work?
This is a really interesting aspect. Basically, reliance and harmonization create incentives for trade, especially for countries that actually manufacture pharmaceuticals.
How so?
Well, think about procurement. As more low-income countries move away from relying only on aid, and as middle-income countries ramp up their own procurement for universal health coverage.
They're buying more medicines themselves.
Right. And increasingly, these buyers are going to require that the medicines come from manufacturers regulated by an NRA that meets a certain standard specifically, GBT Level 3 maturity.
Ah, so having a level 3 NRA becomes like a quality mark for your country's manufacturer.
Exactly. It's a competitive advantage. If your country has manufacturers, there's a real economic incentive to benchmark your NRA, get it to level 3 or higher, so your companies can access these growing markets.
Is there proof this happens?
The paper gives the example of Mexico. They reformed their agency, COFEPRIS, achieved PA show recognition and WHO level 3 status.
And
And it's estimated this contributed to like a 13% growth in their local pharma market. Plus, manufacturers from countries with these recognized high-level NRAs often get preferential treatment elsewhere.
like faster approvals in other regions.
Yeah, like CARICOM giving accelerated processing for products already approved by trusted agencies. So as more countries benchmark and prove their NRA is reliable, it builds trust in their medical products. That boosts local manufacturing, boosts exports.
So the GBT's impact really ripples out from patient safety to system efficiency to international trade and economic development. That's quite a scope.
It really touches on a lot of interconnected areas.
Okay, so it's having a lot of positive effects, but nothing's perfect. Looking ahead, what are the key areas the paper identifies for improvement or further development around the GBT?
Well, one point raised is about transparency of the results.
How so?
Currently, it's up to each individual NRA whether they make their benchmarking results public.
Ah,
The paper suggests that encouraging more transparency could build even more trust and collaboration between NRAs and with partners.
makes sense. Openness builds confidence. What else?
Another key thing is developing a better way to figure out the cost of implementing those institutional development plans, the IDPs.
The budgeting part.
Yeah. Right now, estimating the cost can be a bit arbitrary or inconsistent. Having a more robust, standardized methodology for costing would really help countries plan and secure the funding they need.
You need realistic cost estimates to make a good plan, right?
Absolutely. And linked to that, the paper stresses the need to really clearly communicate all these benefits we've discussed, the public health ones, the economic ones, to policymakers.
Why is that so important?
Because benchmarking takes time and resources. You need strong political will. So clearly showing leaders the return on that investment, safer people, stronger economy, is crucial for getting them to prioritize strengthening their regulatory systems.
Got it. Make the case compellingly. Anything else, Major?
The paper briefly mentions the WHO listed authority framework, the WLA.
The WLA, what's that?
It's actually a separate initiative from the GBT, but related. The idea is it will eventually replace the older concept of stringent regulatory authorities that WHO and others use.
Okay.
The WLA framework involves its own assessment of how well an NRA performs, all aimed at, again, increasing trust and reliance globally. How exactly the GBT maturity levels will feed into WLA eligibility, well, that's still being worked out. But it's part of the future picture of global regulatory cooperation.
So the GBT is a huge step, but it's also part of this bigger, evolving landscape of ensuring medicine quality worldwide.
Precisely. It's a dynamic tool in an ongoing effort.
Well, this has been incredibly enlightening. A really fascinating deep dive into the WHO global benchmarking tool. It's so clear that this isn't some, obscure technical thing.
Not at all.
It's fundamental. It's about ensuring people everywhere get medicines that are safe, that work, that are quality assured. And it's not just about pointing out problems, but providing that concrete path forward with the IDP.
And that interconnectedness is key, isn't it? Stronger systems in one place really do benefit others, contributing to a more secure global supply of medicines we all rely on.
Yeah, absolutely. Which leads us to a final thought, maybe, for you listening. Given this interconnectedness of health, of trade, how might strengthening regulatory systems, say, halfway across the world, ultimately impact the quality, maybe even the availability of medicines right here in your community?
Something to ponder.
It really is worth thinking about the ripple effects of having a more standardized global approach to something so fundamental.
And, this conversation has really just scratched the surface.
Sure.
If you're interested, definitely look into the WHO's work more, maybe see what initiatives are happening in your own region regarding medicine regulation. There's a lot more to learn out there.